What if I told you that the absolute quickest way to destroy a country is to put a genuinely good, forgiving, perfectly honest person in charge of it?
I mean, it sounds completely backwards.
Right. I know it does. Because we are basically conditioned to want leaders who are, well, saints.
Yeah, totally. It is deeply ingrained in us.
Exactly. We hold up this moral compass of traditional ethics, things like humility, mercy, always telling the truth.
Yeah.
And we expect the needle to just point steadily toward good no matter who is holding it.
Right. Whether it is just a private citizen or, the actual head of state. We just assume the rules of being a good person perfectly overlap with the rules of being a good leader.
But then you step into this brutal arena of statecraft, and suddenly that magnetic field seems to warp. Like the compass spins, and the moral map you brought with you might actually just lead you straight off a cliff.
It really might.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking you right into the heart of that shifting moral landscape. We are unpacking a stack of incredibly notorious sources. We've got excerpts from Niccolò Machiavelli's infamous text, The Prince, along with some of his biographical writings on historical figures like Castruccio Castracani.
Yeah, and for centuries, the very word Machiavellian has been the synonym for, ruthless, godless, venomous behavior.
Oh, yeah. It is probably the most loaded term in political science. So we want to find out if that reputation is actually fair.
Right. Our mission today is to really dig past that cartoonish villainy. We are going to explore whether the prince represents a complete, undeniable break from traditional Christian political ethics.
Like those core values we mentioned: humility, mercy, forgiveness, moral consistency.
Exactly. We need to figure out if Machiavelli is rejecting these values entirely, or if he is just compartmentalizing them, or maybe fundamentally redefining what they mean for the political arena.
And to do this, we are looking directly at his own words. We've got his specific advice on cruelty, on generosity, on whether a leader should keep their promises, and we are going to examine the exact historical examples he uses to prove his points. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
Because before we get into the specific virtues like honesty or mercy, we really have to understand his foundational worldview. He deliberately announces this massive departure from the traditional political manuals that came before him.
Yeah, historically, those earlier manuals were known as mirrors for princes.
Mirrors for Princes, right?
Right, and they were basically utopian guidebooks. They told leaders how they ought to behave in this perfect, God-fearing world. And Machiavelli, he explicitly states he is just abandoning that method.
It really does.
He writes that past thinkers have pictured these imaginary republics and principalities that, well, they have never actually existed in the real world.
I remember reading that line. It's striking. He argues there is such a massive, fatal gap between how one ought to live and how one actually lives.
Yeah, he warns that anyone who ignores reality in favor of some moral ideal is just, plotting their own ruin.
He literally writes that a man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue will be destroyed among so many who are evil. Therefore, a prince who wants to survive must, and this is a direct quote, know how to do wrong.
Know how to do wrong, yeah.
But I have to push back here, and push back hard, because when you read that, isn't this just an incredibly convenient excuse to act like a tyrant?
I can see why you would say that.
I mean, it feels like we are taking this hopeful vision of society, this utopian novel, and replacing it with a cynical, cutthroat survival guide that just justifies any terrible impulse a leader might have.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of Machiavelli's argument. He isn't sitting in a dark room rubbing his hands together, advocating for evil for the sheer thrill of it.
Okay, so what is he doing?
He is acting as a diagnostician of a very harsh reality. He is stating that the traditional Christian ideal of moral consistency, this idea of being perfectly good and perfectly honest at all times, no matter the context, that is an active, dangerous political liability.
I am really struggling to see how being honest and good is a liability, though. Doesn't that, build trust?
Well, it builds trust in a community of purely good people.
Right.
But Machiavelli points out that a leader is constantly surrounded by ambitious, opportunistic rivals who are absolutely not playing by those rules.
That makes sense.
Right. If you are entirely good in a world filled with bad faith, you make yourself, and by extension your entire state, incredibly vulnerable. Your enemies will just exploit your predictable honesty. They will exploit your merciful nature.
So he is creating this radical separation between Private morality and public duty.
Exactly. As a private citizen, turning the other cheek is beautiful.
But as a head of state.
As a head of state, turning the other cheek is basically an invitation for an invading army to slaughter your citizens.
Wow, okay, that distinction changes everything. So if a leader has to learn how to do wrong to protect the state, how does that actually translate to physical action?
That is the big question.
Let's move from the theory of doing wrong to the practical application of something like mercy. How do you redefine mercy in a world where turning the other cheek gets you killed?
Well, Machiavelli redefines it by looking at the actual outcomes of violence rather than the intent behind it. He brings up the historical example of Cesare Borgia.
Oh, Borgia, he was infamous.
He really was. Borgia was widely considered by his contemporaries to be an absolute monster. I mean, he was brutal, he was swift, and he used lethal force without hesitation to consolidate power in the Romagna region.
So like a textbook tyrant by all conventional standards.
By conventional standards, yes, absolutely. But Machiavelli points out the actual result of that brutality.
Okay.
See, before Borgia, the Romagna was chaotic. It was plagued by warlords, constant robberies, and zero centralized authority. Borgia's quick, decisive cruelty terrified the warring factions into submission.
So it actually worked.
It did. It brought lasting peace, unity, and loyalty to the region. The citizens could finally live their lives without fear of constant localized violence. And Machiavelli contrasts that direct, surgical cruelty with the behavior of the Florentine people.
Okay, what did the Florentines do differently?
Well, the Florentines wanted to maintain their moral purity. They wanted to avoid a reputation for cruelty at all costs. So they showed, quote-unquote, mercy by choosing not to intervene with military force in the nearby city of Pistoia.
Which was having problems, right?
Yeah, it was being completely torn apart by rioting between two rival factions. But the Florentines kept their hands clean, they didn't spill any blood.
But the people of Pistoia bled for it.
Exactly.
The city was completely destroyed by factional violence, while the Florentines just watched, feeling morally superior about their non-intervention.
That is exactly his point. And Machiavelli hammers this home with military history as well. He looks at the psychology of discipline.
Who did he use for that?
He compares the Carthaginian general Hannibal to the famous Roman general Scipio. Hannibal commanded a massive, diverse army of different races and languages in foreign lands for years.
Right.
And Machiavelli notes they never dissented, never rebelled, entirely because of Hannibal's inhuman cruelty.
Wait, really? Just because of his cruelty?
Yeah, that cruelty instilled a level of fear and respect that just overrode cultural divisions and kept the army functioning as a single, orderly unit.
Well, Scipio possessed a much more Christian-like forbearance. I remember he was known as a brilliant man, but he was easygoing and merciful with his troops.
And the result was disastrous.
Right.
His army actually rebelled against him in Spain. His mercy eroded military discipline to the point where the Roman Senate called him out as the corrupter of the Roman soldiery.
Wow. This makes me think of an analogy. It is like a surgeon amputating a limb to save a patient.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Because the sheer act of taking a saw and cutting off a leg is incredibly violent. It is objectively cruel and traumatic. But if that leg is gangrenous and cutting it off stops the infection from spreading and killing the entire person, then the amputation is actually the most merciful thing you can do.
Exactly.
So is Machiavelli basically saying that a little bloodshed up front prevents a massive systemic loss of life later?
That is the exact utilitarian equation he is proposing. True cruelty, in his view, is allowing disorder to fester. When a leader refuses to punish bad actors because they want to feel merciful, robberies and murders break out.
Which hurts everyone.
Right, that hurts the entire community. But merciful cruelty, like a swift, targeted execution ordered by the prince, only offends the single individual being punished, while it saves the entire state by restoring order.
So the Christian ideal of absolute forgiveness is presented not just as naive, but as politically ruinous.
Highly ruinous.
Yes. Okay, I can see how physical cruelty could be justified as this grim, surgical form of mercy if it prevents chaos. But what happens when we move away from physical violence and look at moral virtues?
You mean things like honesty?
Yeah, things like honesty, keeping your promises, being pious. Because if you are deceiving people, nobody is physically bleeding. But the moral fabric seems totally compromised.
This is where Machiavelli introduces his most famous metaphors, the fox and the lion.
Ah, yes.
He uses the allegory of Chiron the centaur from ancient mythology. a creature that is half man and half beast. He notes that ancient princes were supposedly given to Chiron to be raised.
Which is, what, a symbolic way of saying a ruler must know how to use both their human nature and their animal nature.
Precisely. The human nature relies on laws, treaties, and ethics. The beast nature relies on force and craft.
Because the law often isn't enough to stop an aggressor.
Often it is completely useless against an aggressor. You need the beast. But you cannot rely on just one type of beast. You have to be a lion to frighten off the wolves, using brute force to deter attacks. And you have to be a fox to recognize the traps, using cunning to see through the deception of others.
Because a lion cannot spot a hidden snare.
And a fox cannot fight off a pack of wolves. So a wise lord cannot, and honestly ought not to, keep his promises when doing so would be turned against him, and when the original reasons for making the promise no longer exist.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because he doesn't just rely on ancient mythology or generals from antiquity to prove that deceit is necessary. He points the finger directly at the Pope.
Pope Alexander VI, yes. A very prominent figure in Machiavelli's time.
The literal head of the Christian church. Machiavelli writes that Alexander VI did nothing else but deceive men, and he never thought of doing anything else, and yet his deceits always succeeded.
It is a pretty bold statement.
It is, and we see this mirrored in the biography Machiavelli wrote of Castruccio Castracani, the ruler of Lucca. Castruccio was an absolute master of using religion as a prop.
Oh, absolutely.
He became a Roman senator and would walk around wearing a brocaded toga embroidered with the words, "I am what God wills," and on the back, "What God desires shall be."
Just incredible branding, honestly.
Right. He wrapped himself in a divine mandate, all while conquering neighboring cities through outright fraud, ambush, and force. I look at this and I think of religion as a kind of societal operating system.
Okay, I like that.
The citizens are programmed to follow the code, be good, be honest, trust God, but the ruler holds the admin privileges.
They have the root access.
Exactly. They can override the code, break the rules, and rewrite the software whenever a virus attacks the system, all while telling the users that the system is running perfectly.
This raises an important question, though, especially with that operating system analogy. When you read about a pope whose entire legacy is deception, or a warlord wearing a toga claiming God's will while ambushing his neighbors, you really have to ask, does Machiavelli just fundamentally hate religion?
Is he just an atheist trying to tear down Christian virtues?
Right.
Because it definitely sounds like it. He is treating piety like a costume.
It looks that way on the surface, but look closely at the mechanism of what he is suggesting. Machiavelli actually states that it is highly necessary for a prince to appear merciful, faithful, humane, and above all, religious.
Appear religious.
Yes. He emphasizes there is nothing more necessary than appearing to have that last quality.
But why is the appearance so crucial if the actual practice is dangerous?
Because of how human psychology works en masse. The general public judges by what they can see. They judge by the eye, not the hand. They see the outward show of piety, the attendance at Mass, the charitable donations. Machiavelli completely understands that Christian values are incredibly effective for maintaining social cohesion. They make citizens peaceful, obedient, and cooperative.
So he doesn't reject Christian values for the general population at all.
Not at all. They are fantastic for the state.
But the prince himself is exempt.
The prince must have a mind frame so that if the winds of fortune shift, he knows exactly how to act contrary to fidelity, friendship, humanity, and religion. The illusion of virtue is mandatory for public trust, but the actual rigid practice of it is optional and in times of crisis, highly dangerous.
Which brings us to a really dark place. I mean, let's be honest about what we are discussing here.
Yeah.
If a leader is constantly deceiving people, breaking treaties, employing surgical violence, and using religion as a cynical cloak, is there any moral line left at all?
It's a tough question.
Or is the prince just a blank check for sociopaths? Because if I can justify literally anything by saying, oh, I'm protecting the state, can I just do whatever I want? History is full of dictators who use that exact excuse for mass atrocities.
That is the ultimate tension of the entire book, and it is where Machiavelli's philosophy is most frequently misunderstood.
Okay.
To find that moral line, we have to look at how he categorizes men who obtain power strictly through wickedness. He does not give tyrants a blank check. No. He provides two stark historical examples to demonstrate the difference between success and failure in ruthlessness.
I am extremely curious to hear the difference because, violence is violence.
Well, consider Agathocles the Sicilian from antiquity and Oliverotto da Fermo from Machiavelli's own time.
Okay.
Agathocles was the son of a potter who rose through the military ranks. One morning, he calls the Senate and the people of Syracuse together under the pretense of discussing republic business.
Uh-oh.
Right. At a given signal, his soldiers slaughter all the senators and the richest citizens in cold blood. He wipes out the entire power structure in an hour and seizes the princedom.
That is horrific.
Yeah.
What about Oliverotto?
Oliverotto da Fermo did something remarkably similar. He wanted to seize his home city of Fermo. He writes to his uncle, the man who actually raised him, saying he wants to visit and show off his military success.
Okay, playing the good nephew.
Exactly. His uncle receives him with honor, houses him, treats him like family. Oliverotto throws a lavish, solemn banquet for his uncle and all the chiefs of the city.
I see where this is going.
After the food is eaten, he suggests they move to a more private room to discuss serious political matters. The second they sit down in that private room, Oliverotto's hidden soldiers jump out and slaughter everyone, including the uncle who raised him.
Wow.
He then rides out, besieges the town magistrate, and makes himself prince.
Okay, both of these guys sound like perfect Machiavellian heroes based on what we've talked about so far. I mean, they used fraud, they used absolute lethal force, they bypassed traditional morality, and they secured the state. So Machiavelli praises them both, right?
You would think so, but here is where Machiavelli draws a very firm, fascinating line based on the psychology of the populace.
Okay.
He admits that Agathocles gained empire and power, but he explicitly states that his barbarous cruelty and inhumanity meant he could not be celebrated among excellent men. He gained power, but he did not gain glory.
Ah, glory.
And this leads Machiavelli to synthesize a completely new, alternative ethical framework based on the concept of cruelties well used versus ill used.
Wait, how can a cruelty be well used? What is the mechanism there?
It comes down to human memory and trauma. Machiavelli argues that severities are properly used when they are applied at a single stroke, out of absolute necessity for one's security.
So ripping the Band-Aid off.
Exactly. You do it once, at one blow, and you do not persist in it. The shock and awe terrify the populace into submission, but then the violence stops. Over time, you replace that initial violence with benefits, peace, stability, economic growth that turn to the subject's advantage.
And people forget.
The populace eventually forgets the initial trauma because their daily lives improve.
And poorly used cruelty, what does that look like?
Badly employed cruelties might start small, but they multiply over time. The ruler is forced to keep the knife in his hand constantly because he didn't secure his position early on.
Right.
This creates a state of perpetual anxiety among the citizens. Every knock at the door is terrifying. Biologically and psychologically, living in perpetual terror forces the populace to hate the leader. And hatred is the one thing a prince must avoid at all costs.
Because hatred leads to conspiracies.
Yes.
And conspiracies lead to rebellions, which destroys the state. So his moral compass isn't broken. It's just calibrated to a completely different magnetic north.
Exactly.
Gratuitous ongoing violence isn't a sin because it offends God. It's a sin because it offends the populace and destabilizes the regime.
Right.
The violence must be ruthlessly efficient, absolutely necessary, and ultimately beneficial to the stability of the state. It can never be for sadistic pleasure.
Precisely. If you must inflict injuries, he advises, do them all at once so they're tasted less and offend less. Then hand out benefits little by little so their flavor lasts longer. It is a deeply psychological understanding of how humans process fear and gratitude.
So what does this all mean? When we look at all these sources together, we see that the prince truly does represent a massive break from traditional Christian political ethics. But he isn't just throwing those ethics in the garbage, nor is he advocating for cartoonish villainy.
No, he is deeply compartmentalizing them. He acknowledges that Christian virtues like mercy, honesty, faith, they are beautiful, essential glue for the private citizens of a society.
But for the ruler.
For the ruler tasked with protecting that society in a geopolitical world full of bad actors and aggressive neighbors, relying rigidly on those same virtues is a fatal trap that will absolutely get your people conquered.
And this totally changes the way we evaluate leadership, even today. It forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. When we demand absolute moral purity from our leaders, are we actually asking them to risk the stability of the very systems that keep us safe?
It is a profound question.
Right. If a leader refuses to play the fox and the lion because they want to keep their own personal conscience perfectly clean, and as a result their country falls into chaos or economic ruin, were they actually being a good leader? Or were they just being selfish with their own morality?
It demands that we separate personal goodness from political effectiveness. Machiavelli is warning us that you cannot judge a head of state by the same moral rubric you use to judge your neighbor. The neighbor's job is to be a good person in a functioning society. The head of state's job is to ensure that society survives, even if they have to dip their hands in blood to keep the walls standing.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over. According to the traditional Christian ethics of Machiavelli's time, committing acts of violence, murder, and deceit condemns a person's eternal soul. You face infinite punishment for those actions.
Hell, basically.
Exactly. But if a leader willingly commits these terrible acts specifically to protect their people from ruin, if they deliberately sacrifice their own moral purity and willingly damn their own soul just so their citizens can live in peace and stability, is the ruthless Machiavellian leader actually performing the ultimate tragic act of self-sacrifice? Think about that the next time you scrutinize a leader's moral compass. The needle might be spinning wildly away from good, but maybe that's exactly what is keeping the ship from hitting the rocks.